So good evening. Thank you very much for joining us, and a big welcome indeed to FOLA and the Gardens Trust series, Why So Special? So we've invited a range of wonderful speakers to focus on in detail each one of the post-war designed landscapes and gardens added to Historic England's list last year. And our objective with these talks is to raise awareness about the work, the ideas, and the thinking of the original designers, and to see what we can learn from this and take forwards, and to find out more about where the relevant archives are and how we can shout out more about these and other places that are in less fortunate state, and really what makes these places still so very special. We also wanted to know about these places from an alternative perspective. So most of the talks, we have two speakers. We're now on week 2 of new towns and their parks. So last week we started with Harlow Town Park, very unusual configuration enclosing some existing housing and larger than Hyde Park. More recently, it faced a threat or maybe an opportunity of proposed huge residential expansion of the new town on green space adjacent to one boundary of the park. That didn't happen, or it hasn't happened yet, but it triggered a review of the park and the realization that it had slid into a state of disrepair, lost its direction, wasn't serving the local and wider community. And funding was sought to help revitalize some of the original proposals and introduce new elements more relevant to current needs, and many volunteers and others to keep it lively. So this week we're looking at Campbell Park at Milton Keynes, a later start in the history of new towns and a different approach perhaps. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. So we've got Neil Higson, who studied landscape architecture at Reading under Frank Clark and Doris Hole in the 1950s. He refers to himself as a disciple of Ebenezer Howard and the Garden City movement, and he's lived and worked in 3 new towns where he developed a strong interest in people's parks and the environment of public housing. In the early 80s, he was attracted to the Milton Keynes area, and with his wife set up the private practice Neil and Perko Higson and Associates. And then he got drawn into Milton Keynes Development Corporation. So I will leave that bit there. And then our second speaker is Brian Salter, who's been involved with the maintenance and management of the new landscapes at Milton Keynes for 30 years since 1971. And very early on, he was appointed CEO of the then newly formed Parks Trust. Because design doesn't work without management, the talk will flow between both speakers. So Neil and Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Right. So how do I start this arrangement? Right. Well, here we are in Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes was very much a greenfield site, unlike Harlow, which had a lot of development and houses and things to incorporate in its green spaces. So Milton Keynes was actually approved as a master plan in 1969, actually. I think you made a slight error in saying when we came to Milton Keynes, it was in 1975, not in the early 80s. So Perko and I ran a small private practice in Stony Stratford for a time, working on some Milton Keynes projects, but Fred Roche, who I'd worked with in Runcorn New Town, sort of bullied me into joining the Development Corporation and pulling together all the landscape architects who were already working in architects' pockets. I shouldn't say that really, but we made a strong unified landscape team called the Central Landscape Unit of Milton Keynes Development Corporation. These 4 slides really encompass sort of most of really our joint beliefs about Milton Keynes and what we aimed for in Campbell Park. Campbell Park inevitably was a kind of concentration of a much, much larger park system which ran throughout the city, or the designated area of the city. So it's a bit more intense than the rest of the park system. Also, it's a bit more public. But anyway, this is a view of the park, which shows its very original centre, which has hedgerows remaining and copses and some additional planting. And then there was a woodland ridge, and then there was some embankment to this city road down this side. So it had different areas to work on. This lovely picture is a sculpture included in the park, which Brian and I went down to London and had a cruise around in the first time I've ever been in an extended luxury vehicle. But it works absolutely beautifully in a particular part of the park, which I'll refer to in due course. This slide shows the link to the city centre with a piece of landshaping which I refer to a lot, which is the Belvedere. And this is a place for events, and I'll come on to the structure of the park in due course. And this is an image that I absolutely love, and I've always been very keen to have sheep managing parts of the park, and you could really refer to them or consider them as a living installation in the park. So anyway, I love them, but they're a bit of a problem for management, I believe. Why isn't this work? Oh yes, it does. This is a reference to my enthusiasm for Ebenezer Howard. It's his diagram, really. The thing that I most believe about him is the title of his book when it first came out, which was A Peaceful Path to Real Reform. And his aim was really to interconnect countryside and countryside work with civilization and town work, and give a quality environment which makes the two as the living place for all people, workers, and parasites. Looking at this diagram, in the center of it, there's this area is the Central Park, which wraps around the real sort of intense center of the Garden City, where the boulevards come charging in to the absolute nucleus. But the Central Park is a central feature to the energy of the place. And in this diagram, he has it overlooked by houses and gardens. And what happened then? Oh, on something. That's better, thank you. Oh, it's come again. Right, back to normal. And it's overlooked, as he had it then, by the Crystal Palace and by houses and gardens. And he had a grand avenue as well. But that was the model really for for garden cities. We have in Milton Keynes, we have the site of the city centre and the site of the Central Park are next to one another, but they're separated by a city road, which you could say is a bit unfortunate, but in effect, it means that entries to the park from the city centre and from the city centre to the park are quite dramatic routes, really. This is the central one, which is only pedestrian, but the other two are pedestrian and vehicular. There was some very attractive planting done on the embankment to this city road, which really makes a contribution to the park image, as well as the park doing the opposite to the city centre. And this is one of the attractive entrances, which runs through to a round pond and a footpath that goes to the end of the boulevard of the Belvedere. The Belvedere really has terrific views over the rest of the city. All of this was achieved before the Central Landscape Unit was set up. How did I get to that? Yes, I was going to say really that city centre and Central Park are important companions, having almost a symbiotic relationship with one another. A place for business and an accessible place for relaxation, celebration, contact with nature, dreams, and liaisons of various types. But both of those are key elements of civilized living. So we've done the bridge linking. Now this is the master plan, which was prepared by Llewellyn Davis Weeks, Forestier Walker and Bohr master planners, and Peter Youngman was the landscape influence. And I think that probably shows, although I've not had it definitely confirmed, by the distortion of the formal grid, which is responsive to the landform. Campbell Park is this little area here, and the rest of the park is valley parks, this one running all the way up. These water areas are flood balancing lakes with variable water levels, and they're intense recreation places. And all of these are linear park links, which amount to, I think, sorry, I've done this again. I think, well, when I was working there, it was 1750 hectares, and Campbell Park is 300 hectares. But I think there's now much more that the Parks Trust take under their belt. So Campbell Park is an intensification, in a way, of the whole park system. But the park system needs a very special approach to its development and design. Oh yes, there was a nice phrase used about the grid road system, that it made the city a rug which was laid on the landscape, which I thought Stephen Gardner used that in an architectural journalist, which was a very pleasant way of referring to it. So, early dreams and concepts. This is the round pond, which I must say I have always loved, ever since seeing an old gentleman bring a very large model of the Titanic and float it on here and drive it around electrically, and it didn't sink. So this was part of the early dreams, and you can see the rather formal approach that was being used, and these very effective. That's a north, south, east, and west thing, and it's all sheltered by actually leyland cypress hedges. But that was early work, and this was there was an architect-led team dealing with the park, and this was one of them was Andrew Mahaddie, who was an absolutely beautiful artist and a wonderfully sensitive architect towards landscape. And this was his vision of the city of trees, but which is a bit more lavish than we ever could achieve. Nevertheless, the early dreams and concepts of the team left some good messages, but among them there was proposed the Silbury Mound, which was to be enormous, with cascades and stairways, plus a range of dramatic features, including formal pathways and planting, and a glass bridge across the valley with cascades and lots of water playing wonderful games. It was drawn, started on, and never built because of financial constraints, really. So just on this, the City of Trees early plan, it was a somewhat extravagant green vision of the City of Trees, but it was beautiful. But at this time, Milton Keynes was somewhat lost between designers' dreams and the making of a living city. And as financial strictures began to appear from movements in the central government, it was the whole opportunity somewhat changed, but it became more realistic. There was very slow progress, and this is the Belvedere in 1977, and it was just formed from spoil from the building of the city centre. I thought it was from the building of the cutting of the road, City Road, but Brian, who was in Milton Keynes before me, says it was from city centre. So, but there was a beautiful, I think, computer drawing of the contours of this, and it was built according to that. But there was, sorry. Fred Roche was getting pretty impatient because he'd been appointed general manager in 1971 to make Milton Keynes start. I'd worked with him in Runcorn New Town, where landscape input had been an important influence, and his energy and vision had been notable. He was, of course, a fundamental influence in the making of the new city as it is now. And also, the best thing was that he was a wonderful ally to landscape design and the management teams. The park areas, where they'd been defined in the master plan, there was no coherent plan for the park, although the architectural team had made negotiations with various famous artists, including Henry Moore, and Derek Walker's, he was chief architect. His intention was that the Campbell Park should become a sculpture park to rival the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. But as I say, there were financial strictures and no plan. So there was a desperate need, really, as things tightened up, for believable plans and achievable realities. And we had to produce those. So one of the things I did was this sort of, I call it the titillation plan, which really was to excite people a bit about not just the Campbell Park part of the exercise, but how a composition of park activities could come together. So this area, for example, here, we thought of as a recreation high street with all these plots set out for different kinds of uses, giving a real focus of mixed use recreation, commercial, most of it commercial. Sadly, it didn't happen in that form, but eventually certainly the centre part of it happened. This part of the park we had already worked on in our little practice, and Pirco took over the completion of this. It's the Willen Lakeside, which in effect has become the seaside promenade of Milton Keynes. This area here is the Peace Park, and the Peace Pagoda landed in this point here. Eventually, we managed to achieve a labyrinth in this area, which was based on saffron walled and turf maze, and this was the Buddhist temple. And then this was the Hook Church of the village of Willen. So you know, the interaction of all those things with a Bridgewater, with each, sorry, back in Newtown, the Grand Union Canal running through it, which had been lined by Lombardy poplars to draw attention to it, and it was a terrific thing to do. Okay, so that the purpose of that was to try and excite people, not only chief officers, but also our own staff. Some of them were a bit disgruntled at me being brought in and separating them from their pet architects. It was really urgent that we got landscape off the ground and made it popular. So we ran a Your Parks exhibition, which was this was a set of images just to show people that the main areas of the park could be a mixture of agriculture, recreation, and routes. And those images were beautifully drawn by one of our chaps. But the basic principle that we set up as the park development principles was the strings, beads, and setting. This was a combination of routes, which were strings to the park areas, beads, which were events, existing pubs or new features, picnic areas, etc. It's telling me your internet connection is unstable, but never mind that. And then this was the settings. So the settings could be paddocks, larger scale agriculture, forestry, wetlands, open green areas which were usable, but they were also hay meadows or flower areas, and areas with clumps of trees with a parkland image, but still grazable. And we applied those to master plans for every section of the park. We call these park development plans. And this was the first one we did, and we showed it in that exhibition. And you can see just the range of things, an existing windmill, the super concrete cows, and there was a Roman villa restoration. And they were all incidents on the organised park. So that system was very successful. And the Your Parks exhibition was extremely popular, and it was a combination of our efforts and the recreation unit's efforts as well. So we had to concentrate on Campbell Park, and Campbell Park was a combination of things achieved already, which was the Belvedere. This is the Belvedere, the round pond, and the natural landscape of the area, and the road associated works down here. So a comprehensive plan was urgently needed for a citizens park. And cost was a serious consideration. We went through a whole series of models. Sorry. A series of plans which related cost to development. And this is the final version of those, which showed the top area of the park with the round pond and the Belvedere coming through to there, and that we expected that to be taken on eventually by the careful landscape managers of the city council, the town council, and it allowed for mowing and for reinforced grass for events, etc. The rest of the park divided into a woodland bridge along this side, which is the south side of the park. This area, the complex area associated with roadworks, it was quite steeply sloping in parts, and we thought we could make it a real network of wandering footpaths and take water down it from the round pond all the way down to the area where it would be gathered before being passed underneath the canal and beyond. The central area, the body of the park, was very much English landscape character, with groups of trees, and this was the area that we wanted to maintain with sheep, if at all possible, or llamas, or deer, or whatever. And we get to the lower park, and the cricket pitch was at this stage rather squeezed in here, and the intention for this city road, which carries across the park, was that it would be a gated road. But there was a lot of conflict about that. And then the lower park would have a series of relatively minor canal-related commercial uses. So that translated eventually into this formal diagram of the city gardens, as we call it here. The road across the park, we came up with this device, which was to keep city road standards, but step the crossing down with, initially I called them roundabouts, but then the architects were upset at that, so we called them circuses instead, and they were accepted. So the woodland area across here, the body of the park in here, and the upper park with its round pond. And this is the round pond, which I'm really sorry to see go, because it was popular and it was very much used, but I gather it was rather difficult to maintain. So we have ended up with this, which is the Milton Keynes Rose. How's the time going? So we'll come down really, I think now, to the elements of the park, which are shown in the label diagram. The first is the upper park, which we just looked at. And this is the body of the park. And one of the uses in the body of the park was the open air theatre, which initially was completely open to grazing, but it's been subsequently developed and has now got a better cover for the performers, and it's fenced off, so it can actually be a money-making proposition to support the events, which is all to the good. But it's still a beautiful area to sit out on the grass and be entertained. This is the body of the park, with its mobile installation of sheep wandering around and looking after it. And that's really sort of quintessential English landscape, really. Now we're looking at the citizens' gardens. And the citizens' gardens, which are on the north side, had lots of opportunities. As you got to the lower part of them, there was water gathering, and we could do a wetland area, a network of paths, and this was quite a Victorian introduction, really. It was this metal gazebo, which is a bit in line with the Birkenhead Park inspiration of the old area. And this little gem was a captured spring, which we made into almost a secret garden. And the rill comes from here, very much inspired by Roche, and runs into the major rill, which runs all the way down the park. This is up to the woodland area, and the woodland area had this rather high quality development, which was backed into it, and planting was strengthened around it. So the woodland ridge really embraces this development and the upper part of the park, and also defines the edge of the park. To preserve the woodland, as I've said before, we moved the road, the cross city road, further down, and achieved this cutting, which had crib walling and reduced the impact on the existing city wood, which is here. And this is the whole thing under construction, which was, we had very good relationship with the engineers. And this is what we did with it to make rather an exciting crossing through the park with the footbridge that links to the lower park over the top, and the planted crib walling and quite lavish shrub planting. So this zoom, not zoom, what do you call them? Drones, yes, this drone photo. They're horrifying creatures, but they're very good for photographing parks. This is the centre of Campbell Park. The edges we hoped would be developed in a rather special way, but they're very, very slow to get going. But the park itself was completed. Cricket pitch here, the centre of the park here, and the Belvedere and the upper park. And this area here is the citizens' gardens coming down and running across into the lower park. And this is the canal side park, with the water eventually gathered before it goes underneath the Grand Union Canal. And this is very shapely ground, and that the head that I started with is situated in here. I think I'm running short of time, am I? Anyway, let's just go back to that. How do I go back? Right. Unfortunately, some development is occurring now in relationship to a new marina, as they call caravan parks. And it is of disappointing quality, really, unfortunately. But it is life, and that is what the area needs, really, some vitality. And this is the cricket pitch and the pavilion, which has got office accommodation as well as the cricket pavilion. The woodland is rather reinforced, carrying across that road, which is good. And this is an old lane, historic lane, which I think actually predates the canal. I'm not sure, but it's now used as a horse trail connection into the park. These are the various types of paths which wander through Campbell Park. This is one of the major ones, which is followed by the main rill, which runs down the side of it. This is in the middle park area, was the body of the park, as I called it. And this is in the citizens' gardens with those meandering narrow paths which run through lots of seating. And we had hoped that all the shrubs could be, first of all, the collection of shrubs which were used elsewhere in the city would be gathered together here and labelled for the information of residents, but it was never done. But nevertheless, a collection of interesting shrubs used in the rest of the city, and fascinating tree species with particular qualities. And it works. It worked when I knew it extremely well. This is the level of rather ornamental shrub planting which occurred to fascinate residents in that part of in the citizens' gardens, whereas the body of the park was very much natural, quintessential English landscape with agricultural intervention. And this path is the major one that runs right down to the lower part of the park. Right. I'm going to go back, please. As you can see, I'm not very good with. This is my first zoom. This piece of sculpture, and this is a kind of plea that I'm making to the Parks Trust. But I think a park like this can get slightly overburdened with permanent sculpture, and permanent sculpture can be a bit boring really sometimes. Very exciting and very important in bringing bits of the park to life. But one thing that did work really well in Campbell Park early on was short-term sculpture exhibitions. And this was part of an exhibition which was bronzes based on Tai Chi movements. And I think there were, I don't know, about 8 to 10 of these sculptures. It was very popular, so popular that one of them was stolen. But this kind of dynamism of portrayal of art in the park, I think is something that I think is quite important. And this really is the prospect of the park from above. You can see that the Milton Keynes Rose has been introduced. Pity the old park and its fountain have gone, but it does a similar job really. It makes a nucleus for this formal bit of the park. This is special grass, special soil with bits of fibre in it so that it will take these of big lorries and things for events, fairs and what have you. Here is the a labyrinth, and in a piece of sculpture in the centre, which is an armillary sphere. And that's it, with rather formal planting around it. So this is the upper park doing its job. That is the Belvedere overlooking everything. This is the middle park with its quintessential English landscape. And this is the citizens' gardens, and this is the naturalistic woodland with its dark paths that are going through it. And the whole overlooks the main park system, which is all of this lot, which has Willen Lake, which is a variable water level flood balancing lake at the moment, and that's another part of Willen Lake. And this is the big area of Streams, Beach and Settings Park, which goes off to the north, and that's it going off to the south. And you can see the impact of the extensive planting policies of MK on the absorption of housing into a coordinated and composed landscape structure for the city. But it would all be utterly useless, really, if it wasn't for the Parks Trust and the management of the area. which was set up under Brian Salter's direction. He was the first CEO of the Parks Trust. And one of the great things about the start of the Parks Trust is that people who had worked in the recreation unit and been nurtured by Brian came into the Parks Trust. So there was a quality work or staff structure, as well as a very experienced manager. So Brian can tell us now, I think, about the problems and agonies of running the management of all that stuff that we so enjoyed doing as design and implementation. Okay.
Okay, could we have your slide, one of those drone slides of Campbell Park? Could you go back a couple so there's something to entertain people while I talk? Would you be able to do that?
That's a good one. Yeah.
That's it. That's lovely. Right. Well, I'll take over then. And the Parks Trust really emerged as a function of the end of the Thatcher years. It had been the intention, I think, all along that the inheritor of the park system would be the local authority. But the trust really became the child of political expediency, because with Thatcher, the scheme was to roll back the frontiers of the state. And she was no friend of local authorities. And the corporation was instructed to look at alternatives other than the local authority to take on the responsibility, this huge responsibility of then approximately 5,500 acres of mixed-use park of the complexity that Neil so adequately described, and the parkways, the linear plantings alongside the very extensive city grid road system. Now, this quickly became rather a threat, an opportunity. And the opportunity was that we could start to think about an organization that would be consistent with the long-term strategy of these park development plans. So instead of the electoral cycle of 5-year whims in a local authority with its flavors of the season, there could be a body which could be thinking long-term, 50 years or more, about the sustainability and the continuous management of this green heritage. Now, the trust was conceived really on the business model of cutting your coat according to your cloth. Those responsible for incurring expenditure would actually be responsible for raising the income. So there was a direct link and an automatic relationship between what was possible and what could not be done. So the business model was light, and the trust, the Parks Trust, was established in 1991 to take on the green heritage as a charitable company limited by guarantee. An endowment was negotiated with the Treasury, and that endowment then came in property and cash to 21 million. And this figure was calculated using a Treasury model of a self-liquidating grant which lasted 30 years. And it was up to the trust to husband that resource to ensure perpetuity. And that was known as the balancing package or commuted sum. Now, technically, there was no allowance for promotion, interpretation, visitor management, wildlife management, education activities. The endowment only covered current and future liabilities of the green infrastructure. Any enhancement had to be self-funded according to the cloth that could be woven by the trust. Now, the birth pangs of the trust were fraught. The government was winding up all new towns and agreeing balancing packages with mainly local authorities to divest as many liabilities as possible, rolling back the frontiers of the state. The corporation and the business community of Milton Keynes, and this was important, were concerned about the lack of ability or the lack of will of the local authority to hypothecate or ring fence the balancing package to ensure requisite expenditure on the green environment as opposed to any competing welfare or social care demands on the council. So the charitable company limited by guarantee was a device to ensure that endowed monies could only be dispersed to the charitable objectives defined in the constitution of the trust. Now, fortunately, Development Corporation data was very robust, and it made our job of negotiating with the Treasury much easier to stop them whittling us down. However, the Milton Keynes Council were most unhappy about being excluded from the potential receipt despite being guaranteed trustee representation. They issued a legal challenge and a judicial review had to be heard and evidence taken. And then on top of that, we had a deadline of winding the whole corporation up by 1992 and getting this thing launched. And then John Major calls an election in April 1992, so government goes into purdah. So despite a very favorable, well, absolute favorable review from the judicial review, some unfortunate compromises had to be made with the council in order, at the last minute, in order to get this deal signed and sealed before the deadline of the end of March 92. Anyway, the upshot of this was we had a vehicle. It was the trust. It was given a 999-year lease on the parks and parklands, and the freehold was granted to the council. The board of the trust comprised of Milton Keynes representatives of one. The county council had a representative, the Milton Keynes council had three. The county council had one because it wasn't a unitary authority at that stage. And then the Association of Parish Councils, and then the constituencies of agriculture, forestry and sports, and the Chamber of Commerce and the Wildlife Trust all had nomination rights. Anyway, the vehicle was a vehicle for continuity of management. The management was done mainly by contracts, and this was done to 20 or so small family firms spun out of the privatization of former direct works and some larger contracts. Professional and technical skills were retained, and access to the sports, arts and community established by the trust in place of the corporation, but relatively seamlessly. So all the green responsibilities, thinning, respacement, coppicing, sanitation, felling, etc., were the grist of the operations team, and visitor and events management and engagement and wildlife and biodiversity management and monitoring was set up. Now, the great news is that notwithstanding national declines in numbers of insects, birds, and much wildlife, surveys in MK are showing enhanced biodiversity. A personal highlight was to witness the return of otters to the rivers and their colonization of our lakes, much to the chagrin of some of the fishing community. So that was the start in 1992, 20 staff and 20 so contractors. The in-house staff were primarily involved with the policy and specification of the green estate together with its supervision. Everything else was outsourced, including commercial property and investment management. The balancing package, as I said earlier, was property, and these were commercial properties in Milton Keynes, such as local centres, pubs, outdated industrial units, which I have to say were the remnants of the commercial estate that hadn't been disposed of in the wind-up of the corporation and sold to the institutional investors. The important thing was that commercial estate was freely tradable, and it was part of the trust mission to grow the returns from the portfolio by diversifying into different types of investment grade property, not necessarily in Milton Keynes. I now understand that only 53% of the commercial properties are now located in Milton Keynes. Today, 30 years on, or whatever it is, no, 20, where are we? Yes, 30 years on. Much, if not all those activities have been brought in-house under a different chief executive, involving 65 staff, an annual expenditure of 12 million compared with the 1 million in 1993. The asset base has been grown in the 30 years to 129 million from the original 21 million. And this is the lifeblood that's feeding the current activities of the trust. But it's still not a sustainable base. They would still like to get to about 150 million at today's prices. Thus, there are still risks to incur with the investments to grow even further to get to a totally future-proofed level. The trust has changed to reflect all this, and there's only 3 nominated trustees from the council and 1 from the parish councils. And the number of trustees must be no less than 8 and no more than 20. These include PR specialists, property managers, HR, accountants, lawyers, all acting pro bono, committed to seeing the trust prosper. I'm pleased to say the council now see the trust as a force for good and wish for the trust to intervene regarding its own not inconsiderable landscape inheritance with private and public housing, where austerity has dictated now fire brigade responses only, i.e. dead and dangerous stuff removed and little else. Nothing that can be considered as sensitive intervention. This reflects, I know, the plight of many other authorities, and the enmity of yesteryear in Milton Keynes has gone, regrettably, as have the commuted sums that went to the council. Specifically, Campbell Park, the trust has been able to manage the complex green issues and requirements very readily from its intrinsic DNA of keeping faith with the original design and animating it with ranges of events from international arts festivals to sporting events, picnics, and theatre. The cricket green remains a very important part of the provision of Campbell Park, and it is a great test at the moment because I'm afraid our national summer game is in a certain amount of disarray, and getting first-class games down there now is proving more difficult than it used to be. And it is the uncertainties posed by the, as on yet, unspecified developments that are each side of Campbell Park. Lots of green spaces yet to be developed. The Parks Trust has currently a scheme for getting more enlivenment in the way of play areas and cafes in the park, but without the certainties of knowing just what's happening all immediately around it, it's a little bit difficult to make decisions. In retrospect, I'd say that 30 years have transpired since the trust was established, and that was the timeline of the original Treasury grant. The lease has a further 969 years to run, and in the last 20 years, I'm aware of at least 6 major threats from invasive pests and diseases, which the trust is having to plan for. The good news is that the care and resource are in place to address the challenges, and apprenticeship schemes are in place to ensure a future base of expertise and commitment separated from political whim. I believe the trust has evolved to be managing its landscape liabilities in accordance with the visions of yesteryear as set out by Neil. New strategies are being fearlessly adopted to cope with the rapidly changing ethical, business and planning environment it finds itself in. The green dream of Milton Keynes, the city of trees, is being realised and appreciated more widely in the recent listing of Campbell Park, and is hopefully a start and not an end. And as a tailpiece, I'd just like to say, we have to remember who this park was dedicated to. Lord Campbell, the first chairman of the Development Corporation. Now, Lord Campbell was a life peer established by, I think it was Harold Wilson. And at the Milton Keynes Rose, I think it is, there is a monument to his memory. On that monument says, "Si monumentum requiris circumspice." If you seek a monument, look about you. And of course, he, in his time, was very much the champion of the underdog. His own family fortune was made from slavery. And in his reign, when the family fortune and business came his way, he did all he could to undo that legacy. And I think Neil and his team have made a monumental effort to actually tribute that Lord. And I am very appreciative of the fact that we don't have an Edward Coulson being demolished in Milton Keynes. And I'm very happy that the Parks Trust doesn't have to go through the problems of the National Trust at the moment with the heritage of the big landowning houses of the past. And that we have something here, the Parks Trust, that I'm glad to say Lord Campbell was able to visit us at our new pavilion the year before he died in 1993. He died in 94. So I want to terminate my my presentation on that tribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow. Proper thanks for come at the end. But Helen, maybe can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, I'm going to, there's a contact, Neil, from a person who worked with you, and it's Marilyn Burns. Her name is now Elm, and she wants to contact you, and if it's okay with you, we'll forward her email. And I don't know whether you remember Marilyn. Do you want to have a word, Marilyn, to say hello?
Hello, just unmuted.
Okay.
I can have a, you won't recognise me.
Yes, I'd be delighted to.
Hi. You remember me with dark hair all those years ago? I'm masquerading as a blonde these days.
Oh, right. Oh, so you are, yes.
Yes.
Can I get you on my screen?
Because you're sharing.
Can you not get me? I can see you.
Right. I can't see you, but
No,
well, I can on my helper's phone. Yes, goodness me. Well,
There you go.
is that is absolutely genuine, not artificial, I presume.
No, that's a long time ago, wasn't it? The late 70s.
It was, yes, yes. You worked bravely and well with Tony Southard, didn't you?
That's right, Tony Southard.
Yeah.
That's right. I think he did some work, didn't he, on Campbell Park?
He did some of. Can you see the screen? We've got some of this stuff he did.
Yes.
And
he worked on the Belvedere, I seem to remember.
Well, this is the sort of start of the Belvedere, really.
That's
the
right.
The Belvedere really was Andrew Mahaddie's achievement, and
No, I remember a very unfortunate incident one day when Tony had finished a beautiful pastel drawing of the whole site, and I didn't realise. I thought he'd fixed it, and I went and put my finger on. Oh, that looks interesting. And of course, I smudged a bit of it, didn't I?
Oh dear!
He'd been on it for days and days. So happy memories.
Well, their memories anyway, but they were very mixed from my point of view, because it was battle after battle after battle.
Yes, no, I can remember some of that as well. And what you said about, I mean, we shouldn't say, but at MK, it really was the architects ruling quite a bit on certain issues. So I remember that very well.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the time on this.
I did my best for you.
Thank you.
Marilyn, we'll make sure that your contact details get to Neil. Okay.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And the next question is from Annabelle, Annabelle Dowles, who's asking about, has the park been threatened by newer developments? And just a point about this photograph with the semicircular building in the woods. Was that part of the original plan?
It was. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It was. It was part of the. It was part of. We had very good relations with the private housing unit. And one of their ambitions was to achieve some real quality housing somewhere. And there was an intention to have some housing come into the park and be very participant in the park. And they managed to get hold of some really good developers who employed good architects. And the consequence of that was this development, which we fitted in to the edge of the woodland with. Some of the residents aren't that keen on these many trees around them, but I think it makes it a part of the woodland ridge that dribbles through the lower park, really, to the valley. And the sadness is, I think, that there isn't more of that quality development going on around here. I mean, I did work personally with Andrew Mahaddie when he was with Conran Roche on a scheme in here, which was for. Can you see where this arrow is?
Yeah.
Which was for a mixed studios and housing, and small studios and big studios, and that would have been a terrific development to happen in association with the park. And it would have been, I mean, that's really the hope that things will ultimately happen in here that are another dimension to the quality of the to the culture of the city, really.
Yes, it's interesting that you talk about it, because the things like the projects in Paris, all the parks were, led by also having very, very high, not high development, but high quality residential districts surrounding the new parks in Paris over the Millennium projects, and also places like Battersea Park. They were built, and then associated residential districts were built right on the edge of the park because they were such desirable locations.
Really quality design rather than posh houses.
Yes, exactly. But it's interesting that it probably will come, wouldn't it? You can see that it will be part of the development.
I suppose that's one reason, if these are really protected until something decent arises.
Yeah.
The reason why it's okay, it comes slowly, really.
There were more questions about was vandalism ever a problem in the park?
Oh.
Brian dealt with vandalism, I think.
Mm.
Vandalism is always a problem.
Mm.
I think one of the good things about Milton Keynes is that the density of planting from day one was always very generous. And quite frankly, the density of people there at the start was not that great. And I think the consequence was that it was a numbers game. The planting rates certainly exceeded the vandalism rates. And I think generally Milton Keynes doesn't have a severe vandalism problem. It always has antisocial behaviour, but so far, so good. I hope I don't rue those words, but we haven't had major vandalism as a function of youth unruliness. We've had bigger vandalism through travelling encampments, had some severe problems with that. And of course, the perennial fly tipping. That causes more trouble, I think, than vandalism.
Vandalism in Milton Keynes compared with what I first encountered in Basil and Newtown, of course that's in Essex, is just an absolute dream, even at its worst. And one of the Basildon had one amazing effect on my attitude to design, landscape design, and that was simple, well-spaced avenues, because by the end of the week they'll have gone. And so plant lots and lots of stuff so that if there is a drunken attack on any of your work, at least some of it survives.
Thank you for that. Another question, well, a comment really from Alan Tate. He said, many thanks for this, Neil and Brian. A fitting compliment to my morning of writing about Chatham Village, Pittsburgh, a garden city inspired in a suburb from 1932.
Ooh.
Ooh. I don't know whether you want to comment on that either. Yeah.
I'm familiar with Pittsburgh.
Okay. This is Brian, really, a question about consultation with other new towns. When other new towns and how they finance, how do you work out? Have you taken advice from other places that are needed to manage the financing of this, what was in 92, a new relationship with government and the local authority?
I think the answer was we were very much on our own.
Mm.
Scale of this was pretty enormous. We did retain accountants, Keynes, to assist us with the financial accounting that was required. These were pretty exacting things. You can imagine having commercial property and then projecting what rentals you'll be getting from that commercial property over the next 30 years, the rent reviews, etc., etc. It's a very, very complex task. And as I said in my talk, thank goodness our data was robust, our cost data was good, and our obviously income data from commercial properties was excellent. And we were able to do, with the appropriate expertise and people doing all their discounted cash flow stuff, have a coherent conversation with the Treasury. And I think there was a following wind there. I think we have to acknowledge that. I think the fact that the business community was behind us in this certainly gained us brownie points at the Tory-controlled government end. And this gave us credibility, and yeah, and we were able to. Oh, the other important thing was, of course, the status of our trustees at that time. Now, this is not in any way denigrating current trustees, but the two main hitters were John Duggan, who was a property developer for Gaisley, a property developer with a conscience, I might add, and the financial man, Gordon Cartmel, from the corporation's own accountants, Touche Ross as they were then, who was, I have to say, very, very slick on his financial wizardry and calculations, and he saved us from many a trap, and we have a forever gratitude towards his input. But they were so committed, these people, so committed on this business model of having something which created revenue, and then you had something else that was tailored in order not to outstrip that revenue. They were so focused that they gave their time unwittingly, and we came up with a model which I thought was pretty good.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to bring the questions in the chat to an end and hand back to Annabelle.
Thank you very much, Helen. Gosh, I suppose one thing, sorry, Brian, I was thinking about was whether, you know, you seem to have got such a clever model on the go, whether just stepping back from some of the details, whether you were able to share that with any of the other new towns struggling.
Well, you've got to remember, all this was happening fairly contemporaneously.
Yeah.
The government were anxious to roll back the frontiers of the state, so
Yes.
everyone was doing their own thing independently.
Yes.
Quite frankly, I really don't know, and at that stage, I wasn't focused on other people's problems.
No, I'm sure you weren't. So have you come out? Has Milton Keynes come out better than all the other new towns?
I honestly don't know.
No.
I haven't been in, I have never researched that,
Yes.
but I'm pretty sure that there is, I don't think there's another model where the trust has total control of its endowments. I think all the other models have got somebody else's fingers in that endowment. Like I think Peterborough, I think the endowment is managed by the City Council, but I could be outdated on that.
May I speak? Say that in design, architecture and planning terms, there were regular meetings between of new towns officers, gradually quite senior officers, and gradually less and less senior officers. But nevertheless, it was a sharing of design and planning and architectural concepts, ideas, and particularly how particular developments had weathered, succeeded or failed, and they were very useful. But of course, you know, everything gradually died as lack of interest in new towns was steered by government, even the socialist government.
Well, thank you so much. I think you've given us so much food for thought that might have to come back and knock on your door again for some more answers and questions, things. But that was really such an enlightening talk that you both gave